Hey guys, I know it's been a while, but we're back with another video, and this time we're going to be talking about the history of the fire department in the United States. And eventually, I do want to focus on the history in general and the history of the world of fire department, EMS, police, all of that. But right now, we're just going to focus on the United States. So, in the United States, it started out much like it did on the initial world stage with bucket brigades. So, if you came here before the founding, even the founding of this country, and you were in the 1700s, it started out with bucket brigades, which is exactly as it sounds. If there was a fire, people would run to the nearest well with buckets, and usually it'd be your neighbors and people that you know helping you out, and you would try and form a line from the well to the fire, wherever it is, and run with buckets filled with water to try and put out the fire, or not so much put it out, but to stop it from growing faster than you could get the buckets there, and try and contain it as much as you can and save as many of your belongings. You can imagine how that turned out most of the time. But as we continue through the 1700s and the early founding of this nation, one of our founding fathers that we attribute as a founding father here in the United States is also one of the people that founded the original fire department, and that's Benjamin Franklin. And he started the first fire brigade, or the first organized volunteer fire brigade, called the Union Fire Company, and that was founded in not 19. Sorry, I feel that old, but in 1736 was the founding of the Union Fire Brigade, which was a volunteer fire service. Now, you may think that's awesome, volunteer fire service, helping people out. There's a catch. It's not as great as you originally thought. Now, it worked more like a fraternity or a club than it did a fire department. You were on the fire department, but you paid dues to the fire department that you were on. Reasoning for that was, yes, you would get equipment and a little bit better than a bucket brigade, but these dues were to ensure that your house was also covered under the fire department. If you weren't a part of the fire department, you weren't getting your house fire put out or your barn fire or whatever. You just had to hope that you had nice neighbors to help you out during those situations. The original fire brigade was just a group of people that, in other words, they were funding their own fire department and going on the buddy system of, if your house catches on fire, I've got you. If my house catches on fire, you guys have me. So it was something more or less to ensure protection based off of you paying dues and being a part of this department. So we've come a long way since then, but that's how it originally started out. Now, whenever we get to around the 1800s, is when we start uh, experimenting with steam, and there's not really any cars yet, so it's still wagon drawn. But fire departments they eventually went to steam wagons, or they were pulled by horses. But what the steam did is it pressurized the water in these wagons and would help you put out the fires. They also had something called fire plugs, which were actually buried under the ground. They were the original fire hydrants, basically, but they were more or less aqueducts or spring water or groundwater that was plugged off by a hollowed out tree stump. And what they would do is they'd get on scene of the fire, dig it up, drill into that tree stump, and that's what the water would come out of. And that's the water they would use to replenish what they initially started with, which were in these steam wagons. Now, things also weren't perfect when we get to this point either, because it's still based off of a subscription service. And what this subscription service would do is you would pay into an insurance company. And this was all ran by the insurance companies at the time. And you would pay into this insurance company, and you would get a little plaque, or a metal plaque, that would be on the you could put on the outside of your building, and that would ensure that you were covered by that insurance company. Now, here's where the problems start to go in. When these fire departments would show up, if they weren't paid by that insurance company, and that wasn't part of insurance companies that would pay them for doing the job, they would sit there and watch it burn down. Literally sit there and watch it burn down. Now, if that happened to be a company that they were covered by and that would reimburse them for running these fires and putting out fires, sure, they would fight it. There's additional problems to that. If an insurance company covers multiple fire departments and both of those departments get on scene at the same time, This is well documented in history books and even portrayed in some movies, such as Gangs of New York. If you've never seen it, it's a really great movie. But fire departments would literally meet up on the same street, both see that they're covered on the insurance plaque, and have all out fist fights and brawls to determine who got to fight the fire. Whichever fire crew won could fight the fire, but at that point, the fire had already taken out either most or all of the building. So while they're out there in the street duking it out to see whose district it's in, the building would literally burn down. And that is a culture that carried well into the 1900s as far as whose district it is and who gets to fight the fire. That's something that if you're a firefighter and depending on how old you are, if you're my age, if you're in your 30s or 40s, you very well remember, especially sometimes on volley departments and even some career departments, the chiefs fighting it out over radio or in person, not physically, but having a yelling match of, no, this is my district, it's my firefighters fighting it, while all the firefighters are trying to figure out, hey, we're going to go ahead and put this fire out and deal with what we got to, while the chiefs or the emergency coordinators fight it out over on the side of whose district it's actually in and who's going to get paid for that fire. So that's something that they eventually found the flaw in. So in 1871 is something that every firefighter in this nation will recognize as an organization. That is the first time that October 8th specifically, which is another reason October is Fire Safety Month, but October 8th, 1871 was the Great Chicago Fire. And that's something that every firefighter is going to know. And when they went through academy, is something that was brought up in academy in the history of fire, is the Great Chicago Fire. Over 300 people were killed, and it left over 100,000 people homeless and without homes. And that was something that, as as firefighters, they looked into and they're like, this really shouldn't have happened. It got out of hand. We couldn't fight it. We couldn't control it. And so they really got to looking into the type of construction and why the fire got so big and so quick and spread the way that it did. So that's when they came up with the organization, the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA. And that's something every firefighter today, that is something that is in their vocabulary in the United States, is the NFPA. And it started out with a few regulations on how buildings needed to be built to prevent the spread of fire and due to the Great Chicago Fire. But today it's multiple rule books that if you stack them all together would probably reach the ceiling in this room. And it's created all of these different regulations that buildings have to follow when they're being constructed. And the reason for that is you have incidents like the Great Chicago Fire that they've looked at and seen, this is what we could have done better. And they have created regulations and things based off of different fires and different incidents where things could have gone better or it could have been prevented by a certain piece of technology or by building things a certain way. And that's why we have tons of rules and fire regulations nowadays. And a lot of people think that we shouldn't have that, but just about every rule in that book is due to an incident like the Great Chicago Fire or an incident where somebody lost their life or lost their belongings and found a shortcoming either in the construction or extra things they could have done. As we continue, the late 1800s is really what shaped the base of the fire service today. Technologies really didn't advance all that much, and we have all of the base equipment that we have nowadays, such as pumps and hoses to carry the water. Breathing apparatuses really weren't a thing at the time. Um, in the 1800s, it was very popular for firefighters to have very long, thick beards, and it was known that what they would do, much like some would use sponges, but some would use, the big beards that they had. They would dip them in water and roll them up and basically put it over their face and their mouth to run into a building and carry out someone if they needed to. But that's something that generally they couldn't handle because of all of the smoke and things in the environment. Now, around 1863, there was a device invented that was basically just a very thick cloth canvas mask. And there were many different types and different people who had made them at the time. So there's no real one inventor that was accredited with that. Now, in 1912, as we crest over the 1900s, is really when things start to change technology wise. Of course, we start having motors and motor driven pumps rather than steam or coal driven pumps. City infrastructure starts getting better and they start using metal pipes and hydrants and things of that nature. Now, in 1912 is the first time you see a rudimentary breathing device, an inventor by the name of Garrett Morgan, which a lot of people will post during Black History Month. You can go check him out. He's accredited with like the first fire or smoke safety hood, and it was mainly due to mining incidents and fires at the time. But all it was basically a hood that sealed over your head and had a tube running down to lower on the ground where it would try and pick up clean air closer to the ground rather than up, near your face. And so that's, the first time we had really noticed that, the smoke is staying up and firefighters have always been taught to stay lower to the ground. But that was the first person that noticed, okay, well, if we're staying on the ground, why don't I try and pull the clean air from the ground? And until that, at that point, that was the only breathing protection offered, and it wasn't used very much. It was used in specific situations. It wasn't really until 1945 when you hit a huge hit of firefighters using breathing apparatuses, or the first one is the Scott Air Pack, which many departments still use today. Scott and MSA are the main packs that fire departments use today. And that didn't come into play, like I said, till 1945, and it was used as an air tank. Now there were some European versions that were being toyed with at different times, but the U.S. never really picked up on it, and they also saw a trend of some things that were troubling, such as some of the breathing apparatuses overseas used actual oxygen tanks. And the problem with that is when you get into a superheated environment and it starts heating up, that oxygen tank builds pressure. It had chances and the possibility of rupturing. Not only that, when you release that oxygen into a fire environment, it's just releasing more oxygen for that fire to take in and build off of. So our first air packs, the ones that are literally just using compressed air, it's not giving it any more oxygen than it already has. It's just compressed air that's clean for the firefighter to breathe rather than breathing in the smoke filled environment around him. So that's really the next biggest technology push is 1945. And of course, as we get vehicles and motors, things advance as far as vehicles, but really that's the basis of firefighting. Now, today it's much different, and not because of all of the technology advance, but because there's different tools and different ways to do things. We have had advances in building technology and thermal imaging technology, but as far as firefighting as a whole, it's actually regressed. There's a lot less building fires now, and a lot of that is attributed to the NFPA and building codes that prevent some of these issues or prevent it from spreading as much. But modern day firefighters, 80% of the job is going to be medical calls or rescues or wildland type calls. And because of that, the fire service has had to shift in a way that I don't think they expected. And I'll say that's probably within the last 20 years. You start seeing fire trucks that are rescue trucks. Now, some of this started around the 60s. As I mentioned in a previous episode, the TV show Emergency highlighted how you need rescue trucks for vehicle accidents and things of that nature. The white papers that were published about more people dying, or you're more likely to survive of an injury in Vietnam than you are in the US in a car crash. Things like that highlighted a need to provide different rescue tools, and that the technology really shifted at that point. And then today you have all of the medical calls that fire departments run and different types of rescue. So that's why you see so much more equipment and technology used in fire departments is for the odd jobs, not just the fires. A fire department's job now has become crashes, medical calls, hazmat calls, smoke investigations, alarm calls, anything of that nature. Fire department's going to be responding to, and they've had to adapt their skill set and their equipment to meet those needs. So that's why we have the modern fire department that we do today. But yeah, that's the short history of the United States Fire Service and Fire Department. Now, again, like I said, we could go all day about NFPA codes and equipment changes and everything like that. But this is just a short overview of how the fire service has changed and how it originally started in the United States. If you like this video, let me know. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It really does help out on these videos. If you want to see a more in-depth history of the fire department, just let me know. And we can go more into depth either with the equipment, the codes, or even venture out to the ways it started throughout history across the world rather than just the United States. But until next time, please be sure if you have to call 911 to dial up those details, and we'll see you on the next one.